There is a specific kind of fear that only exists in the total absence of light. On the planet Erebos, that fear wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical law. Erebos was a world that should not have existed. It sat in the shadow of a dying black hole, wrapped in an atmosphere so dense with exotic particulates that it didn't just block light, it consumed it. On Erebos, a high-intensity floodlight that could illuminate a stadium on Earth wouldn't reach more than 3 feet. The photons simply died, absorbed by the hungry velvet air. This was the hunting ground of the Umbra. The Umbra were not made of matter as we understand it. They were entities of semi-coherent shadow, existing in a state of quantum flux that allowed them to be intangible as long as they remained in the dark. They didn't have eyes, they sensed the heat of a beating heart. They didn't have claws, they simply reached through your chest and turned your internal organs to ice with a touch. For the human colonists of Outpost 9, Erebos was a nightmare that never ended. They had landed there to mine the null quartz needed for stealth drive cores, believing their advanced technology would protect them. They brought night vision goggles, but the goggles only showed static. They brought thermal scanners, but the Umbra were colder than the surrounding rocks. They brought lasers, but the beams were snuffed out by the air before they could travel 10 meters. "They're in the wire," Sergeant Kalen shouted, his voice cracking over the internal comms. He fired his pulse rifle into the blackness, the blue muzzle flashes revealing nothing but a glimpse of a twisting, oily limb before the darkness swallowed it again. "I can't see them. I can't see anything," another soldier screamed. Then came the sound, a wet, chilling thud as a body hit the floor, followed by the terrifying silence of a heart that had been frozen solid. Out of the 300 souls at Outpost 9, only 40 remained after the first week. The Umbra weren't just killing them, they were harvesting them. They treated the humans like cattle in a dark pen, picking them off one by one whenever a light flickered or a door opened. When the distress signal reached the 1st Chemical Siege Division, General Elias Scorcher Thorne didn't ask for more batteries or better goggles. He looked at the atmospheric readings of Erebos and saw a chemical opportunity. Thorne was a man of the old war. He didn't like the clean efficiency of lasers or the quiet lethality of railguns. He liked weapons that were messy, loud, and impossible to ignore. He understood that if the enemy lived in the shadow, you didn't just need light, you needed fire that wouldn't go out. "They think they're safe because they can eat our photons?" Thorne growled, staring at the pitch-black feed from the planet's surface. "Fine. Let's see how they handle a sky that burns. Ready the cinder shells. I want a full-scale saturation of the upper and middle atmosphere. General, the phosphorus levels in those shells, they're beyond any regulation," a junior officer stammered. "The smoke alone will suffocate anything on the surface within an hour. The Umbra don't breathe and my boys have sealed suits," Thorne snapped. "Burn it all." The Umbra were gathered around the perimeter of Outpost 9, prepared for the final feast. The high wraith of the Umbra, a being of vast, cold intellect, felt the vibrations of the human ships in the upper atmosphere. It felt no fear. It had seen solids try to bring their artificial stars before. The dark of Erebos always won. The light-bringers return, the high wraith pulsed to its kin. "They bring more heat for us to extinguish. Let them come. We shall drink the warmth from their marrow." Then the sky began to fall. It didn't come as a single blast. It came as 10,000 streaks of white-hot, chemical fury. The cinder shells didn't explode on impact. They burst at an altitude of 5,000 feet, releasing millions of pellets of stabilized white phosphorus. White phosphorus, or Willy Pete as the ancient soldiers called it, is a terrifying substance. It ignites upon contact with oxygen. It burns at over 2,700 degrees Celsius. And most importantly, it produces a thick, brilliant white smoke that reflects light with incredible intensity. On Aribos, the phosphorus didn't just burn. It reacted with the light-absorbing particulates in the air. It was a chemical war against the atmosphere itself. The darkness was suddenly, violently shattered. The null quartz dust in the air, which had spent eons eating light, was now being incinerated by a substance that used its own chemical energy to create a blinding, white-hot glare. The sky didn't just clear, it became a white sun. The Umbra screamed. It wasn't a sound of the throat, but a psychic shriek of agony. Their intangible forms, designed to exist only in the absence of light, were suddenly forced into reality. The phosphorus rain clung to their shadowy bodies. Because WP is an adhesive fire, it didn't just pass through them, it stuck to their quantum flux forms, dragging them fully into the physical plane. The night hunters were suddenly the prey. Sergeant Kalen and the survivors of Outpost 9 stepped out onto the landing pad. For the first time in weeks they could see. The world was a blinding, flickering landscape of white fire and gray smoke. The shadow monsters that had haunted them were now visible, twisted, multi-limbed horrors that looked like oily smoke given shape. And they were burning. The Umbra tried to retreat into the shadows, but there were no shadows left. Every inch of the planet's surface was being illuminated by the phosphorus rain. The white-hot pellets fell into the null quartz canyons, igniting the dust and turning the entire world into a giant, glowing furnace. "Check your seals." Kalen roared, his voice booming over the sound of the chemical fire. "Forward march. If it's black, burn it back." The Cinder Guards advanced. They didn't use lasers. They used heavy, industrial flamethrowers fueled by napalm and phosphorus. They walked through the white smoke like vengeful ghosts, their silhouettes framed by the burning sky. Every time a shadow being tried to reform, a human soldier would drench it in chemical fire. The Umbra, who had spent their entire existence as the ultimate predators, found themselves helpless against a species that didn't just bring light, but brought a fire that was as relentless and dirty as the dark itself. High Wraith of the Umbra tried to flee into the deep trenches of the planet, where the light-eating dust was thickest. But the phosphorus smoke followed. The thick, white clouds of P4010 phosphorus pentoxide filled the trenches, carrying the light and the heat into the deepest corners of the world. The High Wraith was cornered by General Thorne himself, who had landed with the vanguard. Thorne looked at the creature, a 20-foot-tall vortex of screaming shadow that was currently melting under the white-hot rain. "Why?" The Wraith's psychic voice flickered, now weak and dying. "You destroy the world, to destroy us? You burn the very air, have you no care for life?" Thorne looked up at the burning white sky, then back at the monster. He adjusted the oxygen flow in his suit and checked his watch. "We're humans, pal," Thorne said, his voice cold and flat. "We've been burning things to stay warm since we lived in caves. You thought the dark was your ally? We've spent our whole history figuring out how to turn the dark into a fireplace. You aren't a god. You're just fuel we haven't used yet." He pulled the trigger on his shoulder-mounted mortar, launching a final cinder slug directly into the heart of the shadow being. The High Wraith didn't just die, it was incinerated into a pile of white ash. The phosphorus rain lasted for 3 days. By the time it stopped, Erebos was a different world. The atmosphere was no longer pitch black, it was a permanent, hazy gray, filled with the reflective smoke of the human conquest. The Umbra were gone, not just defeated but culturally and physically erased by a fire they couldn't eat. The humans didn't build fancy monuments. They just set up the mining rigs and began to pull the quartz from the ground, working under the permanent, artificial glow of the phosphorus-scarred sky. Humanity had proven the ultimate brutal HFY truth. You can be a creature of shadow, an untouchable nightmare, or a god of the dark. But if you stand in our way, we won't try to find you with a flashlight. We will set the air on fire. We will turn your darkness into a furnace. And we will remind you that while you might be the masters of the night, we are the ones who invented the flame. And in the end, everything burns. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. Keep the fires burning. The dark is done. If you enjoyed this incendiary victory over the shadow aliens, hit that like button. Comment below. What's the most terrible weapon humans have that you'd use against a monster? Subscribe for the next story in the new Frontier saga, the Gravity Anchor. The sky is white. The world is ours.